In 1980, I did a world tour. I had released an album, and I had a greatest hits album, and the demands on my time.
Boz Scaggs wasn't just successful, he was everywhere. His voice helped define an era, selling millions of records and earning major awards. Then, right at the height of his fame, he walked away while the world was still calling his name. But that was only the beginning. What followed was a painful divorce, a years-long custody battle, and personal struggles that unfolded far from the spotlight. Then came another devastating setback that threatened to erase years of hard work and memories. Yet the way Boz Scaggs lives today continues to surprise many people. Boz Scaggs sold millions of records, won a Grammy Award, and created songs that became the soundtrack of the 1970s. His smooth voice poured from car radios and dance floors across America. To fans, it looked like he had everything figured out. But behind the success, there were pressures few people understood. By the time he stepped away from music at the peak of his career, many were left wondering why. The answer turned out to be far more personal than anyone expected. Boz grew up in Texas, surrounded by music but far removed from fame. His life changed during the late 1950s while attending St. Mark's School in Dallas. There he met a fellow student named Steve Miller. The two bonded over rhythm and blues, music that wasn't commonly heard in suburban neighborhoods at the time. They played together in school bands, performing for small audiences that had no idea they were watching future stars. Their partnership continued for years as Boz joined several of Miller's groups, including the Marksmen, the Ardells, and the Whigs. He wasn't the main attraction yet. Instead, he developed his skills as a guitarist and vocalist while learning how to connect with audiences. When Steve formed the Steve Miller Band in San Francisco in 1967, Boz joined him. He appeared on the band's first two albums, Children of the Future and Sailor. Both records captured the spirit of the late 1960s and helped introduce Boz to a wider audience. Before arriving in San Francisco, Boz had spent time traveling through Europe as a street performer. Those experiences shaped him deeply. Singing for spare change and holding crowds with only a guitar taught him lessons no recording studio could provide. He learned that music was ultimately about connection, not fame or chart positions. That confidence followed him back to America. When he eventually left the Steve Miller Band to pursue a solo career, he did so knowing he could survive on his own. His self-titled debut album arrived in 1969. It didn't make him an overnight sensation, but it introduced listeners to his unique style. One standout track, Loan Me a Dime, featured remarkable guitar work from Duane Allman. The song showcased Boz's deep appreciation for blues music and helped establish his artistic identity. Success came slowly. Through the early 1970s, Boz released album after album while building a loyal fan base through constant touring. He wasn't easy to categorize. He blended rock, soul, blues, and pop into something entirely his own. Then everything changed in 1976. His seventh studio album, Silk Degrees, became a massive success. The record climbed to number 2 on the Billboard charts and remained there for more than 2 years. Songs from the album seemed impossible to escape. Lowdown won a Grammy Award and transformed Boz into one of the biggest names in music. The success continued with follow-up albums, and Boz reached the absolute peak of his career. He had achieved everything he once dreamed about. Fame, money, industry respect, and worldwide recognition were finally his. Then, without warning, he stepped away. After releasing Middleman in 1980, Boz abruptly stopped touring and largely withdrew from the music business. Fans were stunned. Rumors spread everywhere. Some speculated about burnout, while others guessed there were deeper issues behind the scenes. The reality was much simpler. Boz later explained that he felt overwhelmed by the non-stop demands of fame. The constant expectations, endless travel, and pressure of maintaining a superstar image had become exhausting. He wanted something many successful people quietly crave, a normal life. There was also another reason that mattered even more. By 1980, his sons Austin and Oscar were still very young. Years spent on the road had kept him away from many important moments in their lives. He realized he wanted to be present as a father rather than constantly chasing another hit record. So he stayed in San Francisco. He opened the Blue Light Cafe and later founded the popular nightclub Slim's. He remained connected to music but stepped away from the spotlight that had consumed so much of his life. For a while, he found peace. But serious personal challenges were already forming behind the scenes. Boz met Donna Carmela Storniola during the early years of his rise to fame. A respected antiques dealer and well-known figure in San Francisco's social circles, she quickly became an important part of his life. The couple married in the early 1970s and built a family together. As Boz's career exploded during the late 1970s, however, the pressures became harder to manage. Constant travel, public attention, and the demanding pace of the music industry placed enormous strain on their relationship. The more successful Boz became, the more difficult it was to maintain stability at home. Eventually, the marriage began to break apart. In 1980, the couple separated and filed for divorce. It happened at the same time Boz was stepping away from touring, creating a period of enormous change in his life. The end of the marriage was painful enough, but what followed proved even more difficult. The divorce quickly developed into a lengthy custody battle over their 2 sons. For 3.5 years, the conflict moved through the legal system. Lawyers, court appearances, depositions, and endless negotiations became part of daily life. The emotional toll was enormous. The legal proceedings also prevented Boz from leaving San Francisco. Had he chosen to give up custody rights, he could have moved elsewhere and focused entirely on rebuilding his music career. But doing so would have meant spending far less time with his children. That was not a choice he was willing to make. Instead, he stayed and fought for the opportunity to remain actively involved in their lives. While many of his peers continued climbing the charts, Boz accepted that fatherhood had become his top priority. After 42 difficult months, the court finally awarded joint legal and physical custody of Austin and Oscar. The outcome brought relief, but it wasn't a perfect solution. The boys divided their time between both parents' homes, adapting to 2 households and 2 different routines. Still, it allowed Boz to remain a major presence in their lives. He embraced the role of father with the same commitment he once brought to music. Life settled into a new rhythm. The boys grew up surrounded by musicians, performers, and the creative energy that flowed through Slim's nightclub. It wasn't a conventional childhood, but it reflected the world Boz knew best. As the family adjusted to its new reality, additional challenges would eventually emerge, testing Boz in ways that neither fame nor success could ever prepare him for. Oscar struggled for years after being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, a condition that made learning and concentrating much harder for him. The diagnosis finally explained many of the challenges he had faced in school, but it did not make those struggles disappear. Boz watched his son battle frustration day after day and searched for answers wherever he could find them. Specialists, books, advice from experts, he tried it all. Yet progress was often slow and the situation left him feeling powerless. As time passed, the custody battle faded into the background and life slowly became more stable. Austin and Oscar grew older, and Boz began to imagine a future where the hardest years were finally behind them. He even started thinking about music again and what a return to the studio might look like. But just as life seemed to be settling down, tragedy struck without warning. On New Year's Eve in 1998, Boz received devastating news. His son Oscar, only 21 years old, had passed away. While most people were preparing to celebrate the arrival of a new year, Boz's world was shattered. From that moment forward, December 31st would never feel the same again. Oscar was found unresponsive in a modest San Francisco hotel room. The circumstances surrounding his death shocked everyone who knew him. An investigation later determined that he had died from an accidental overdose involving illicit substances. It was a heartbreaking outcome that no one had expected. The loss felt even more tragic because Oscar had recently shown signs of improvement. He had completed a rehabilitation program, was holding down a steady job, and seemed to be rebuilding his life. Friends and family believed he was moving in the right direction. On the day he died, he reportedly left home in good spirits. Hours later, everything changed. Part of Oscar's struggle may have been connected to the loss of his close friend, Nicholas Trena, who had died the previous year. The 2 young men had grown up together, and Nicholas's passing left a deep impact on Oscar. Those who knew him said the grief stayed with him long after the funeral ended. 12 days after Oscar's death, Boz spoke publicly about the loss. The interview revealed a father consumed by heartbreak. He described the experience as every parent's worst nightmare and explained that it felt as though his entire world had been torn apart in an instant. Many people retreat from public life after such a tragedy. Boz chose a different path. Determined to honor his son's memory, he became increasingly vocal about the dangers of substance abuse. He urged communities to invest in education, prevention, and support systems that could help struggling young people before it was too late. A private memorial service for Oscar was held on January 5, 1999, at Slim's, the San Francisco nightclub Boz had founded years earlier. The venue that once symbolized family, music, and happier times now became the place where loved ones gathered to say goodbye. Friends, relatives, and musicians filled the room with stories, tears, and memories. When the service ended, Boz stepped back into a life forever changed. He had survived career setbacks, public scrutiny, and a difficult divorce. But losing a child was different. It was a pain unlike anything he had experienced before. Sadly, another devastating challenge was still waiting around the corner. In the late 1990s, Boz and his second wife, Dominique, moved to Napa Valley in search of a quieter life. The move represented a fresh start after years of personal turmoil. Together, they established Scaggs Vineyards, focusing on organic farming and producing high-quality wine. For Boz, the vineyard became more than a business. It became a refuge. The steady pace of vineyard life offered something music never could: a sense of peace, patience, and stability. For nearly 2 decades, the property provided comfort during some of the most difficult years of his life. Then disaster struck again. On October 8, 2017, the devastating Atlas Fire tore through Napa County. Fueled by powerful winds and dry conditions, the wildfire spread with incredible speed. Homes, businesses, and vineyards across the region were suddenly in danger. The flames moved so quickly that many residents had little time to react. Fire barriers, roads, and defensive measures proved ineffective against the intensity of the blaze. What had once been a place of healing and renewal now faced an unimaginable threat. For Boz, the vineyard that had helped him rebuild after personal tragedy was suddenly in the path of one of the most destructive wildfires in California history. Years of hard work, memories, and investment hung in the balance as the flames swept across the landscape. The refuge he had spent nearly 20 years building was about to face its greatest test yet. When the Atlas Fire reached Scaggs Vineyards, it showed absolutely no mercy. The flames tore across the property, destroying everything in their path. The family home, where Boz and Dominique had spent nearly 20 years building a life together, was completely reduced to ashes. The barns, equipment sheds, and vineyard infrastructure that supported their business collapsed into charred rubble. Even Boz's personal recording studio, the place where he wrote, rehearsed, and developed new musical ideas, vanished in a matter of hours. Nothing was partially damaged. Nothing was left standing. When the smoke finally cleared, the property that had once been their sanctuary was gone. The losses went far beyond buildings and land. Every personal belonging inside the home disappeared. Clothes, furniture, vehicles, family keepsakes, and treasured photographs were all destroyed. Decades of memories tied to birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, and career milestones vanished overnight. For most people, that alone would have been devastating. But for Boz, there was an even deeper wound waiting beneath the surface. Over the years, he had carefully preserved handwritten lyrics, notebooks filled with ideas, unfinished songs, and unreleased demo recordings from every stage of his career. These were not just pieces of paper. They were fragments of a lifetime spent creating music. Every lyric scribbled backstage, every melody recorded late at night, and every unfinished project that might one day have become a song was stored there. In a single night, the fire erased all of it. An entire creative archive, built over decades, disappeared forever. What makes the story even more shocking is how close Boz and Dominique came to being caught in the disaster themselves. Just days before the fire broke out, Dominique had left the property to join Boz during a scheduled stretch of tour dates. The trip had been planned weeks in advance. Had those plans changed, either one of them could have been home when the flames swept through the area. Their survival came down to timing and pure circumstance. Knowing that they escaped safely was a blessing, but it did little to ease the pain of what had been lost. In later interviews, Boz admitted that he initially tried to maintain a calm and grateful mindset. He reminded himself that he and Dominique were alive, healthy, and fortunate to have the resources to rebuild. At first, he focused on gratitude instead of grief. But as the weeks passed, the emotional weight of the disaster became impossible to ignore. The experience began to feel less like property damage and more like mourning. He had already endured painful losses in his life, and now he found himself grieving for memories, creative work, and pieces of his personal history that could never be replaced. A house could be rebuilt. A vineyard could be replanted. Even a recording studio could be constructed again. But the handwritten notebooks, unreleased recordings, and decades of private creative thoughts were gone forever. For a songwriter, that kind of loss cuts deep. It was not simply about possessions. It was about losing pieces of a life story that existed nowhere else. As fans watched Boz recover from the wildfire, many began asking how he was managing to keep going after so much heartbreak. The answer surprised many people. Despite rumors that occasionally surfaced online, the fire did not leave him financially ruined. Years of successful albums, songwriting royalties, and smart investments provided stability. The enormous success of Silk Degrees and other projects continued generating income long after their original release. Financially, he remained secure, but emotionally and personally, the years ahead would bring even more change. In 2020, another major chapter of his life came to an end when Slim's, the legendary San Francisco nightclub he founded in 1988, permanently closed its doors. For 32 years, the venue had been an important part of the city's music scene and a major part of Boz's identity. The pandemic delivered the final blow to an industry that was already facing enormous challenges. Once again, Boz watched something he had built disappear, and once again, he accepted it and moved forward. Health concerns also entered the picture as he grew older. In June 2019, he unexpectedly canceled the summer leg of his Out of the Blues tour after doctors ordered him off the road because of an undisclosed medical issue. Fans immediately became concerned and media outlets began speculating about his condition. But Boz remained characteristically private. He offered very few details, choosing instead to focus on recovery. After receiving medical clearance, he returned to performing and continued doing what he loved most. What amazed many observers was that Boz refused to slow down. Rather than retiring after the wildfire or settling into a quiet life, he moved back into San Francisco and resumed an active touring schedule. For a performer entering his 80s, playing dozens of shows a year is demanding under any circumstances. Yet Boz seemed determined to keep moving forward. To many fans, it no longer appeared to be about money or fame. It seemed to be about purpose. Music remained the constant thread connecting every chapter of his life. His later years became defined by a trilogy of albums that many critics consider among the strongest work of his career. Memphis in 2013, A Fool to Care in 2015, and Out of the Blues in 2018 revealed a more reflective and emotionally honest artist. The voice was older, the songs were deeper, and the themes carried the weight of real-life experience. These records explored loss, resilience, and survival in ways that resonated with listeners. Critics who had once dismissed Boz as simply a star from another era were forced to take another look. By the time Out of the Blues was released, Boz had survived the loss of his son Oscar, the passing of his former wife Donna in 2017, and the destruction of his Napa Valley home later that same year. Those experiences inevitably shaped the music. The emotion listeners heard on those records was not manufactured. It came from real pain, real healing, and real perseverance. Yet despite everything he had endured, Boz never allowed tragedy to become the defining feature of his story. Today, he still calls San Francisco home. He continues to perform for audiences who have followed his music for decades, and fans still light up when he performs classics like Lowdown and Lido Shuffle. Interestingly, he rarely spends much time discussing his personal hardships during interviews. He does not dwell on the divorce, the custody battle, the wildfire, or the many losses that shaped his life. Instead, he talks about the music because, after everything he has been through, the music is what remains. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of Boz Scaggs' story. Through fame, heartbreak, success, loss, and survival, he always found his way back to the same place: a guitar, a voice, and another song waiting to be sung. Boz Scaggs' story is far more than a tale of fame and hit records. Behind the Grammy Awards, the sold-out concerts, and the chart-topping success was a man who faced challenges that would have broken many others. He endured a painful divorce, fought a long custody battle to remain close to his children, suffered the unimaginable loss of his son, watched his home and decades of creative work disappear in a devastating wildfire, and still found the strength to keep moving forward. What makes his journey so remarkable is not simply the success he achieved, but the resilience he showed when everything seemed to be falling apart. Time after time, life tested him in ways that no amount of fame or fortune could prevent. Yet instead of giving up, he continued creating, performing, and finding purpose through music. His story is a powerful reminder that even after tremendous loss, it is still possible to rebuild, adapt, and keep pursuing what you love. Today, Boz Scaggs remains a living example of perseverance. While many artists from his generation stepped away from the spotlight long ago, he continues sharing his music with audiences around the world. His voice may be older and his experiences may have left their mark, but his passion for music remains as strong as ever. Thank you for joining us as we explored the incredible life and career of Boz Scaggs. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. And now we'd love to hear from you. What part of Boz Scaggs' life story surprised you the most? Was it his decision to walk away from fame at the height of his success, the heartbreaking loss of his son, the devastating wildfire that destroyed his home, or the way he continues performing well into his later years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.